Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Students Deserve Better Rally this evening, being run in partnership with all the wonderful SUs and organisations run by students, led by students at the grassroots that you see on the screen. The theme for tonight is Unity is Strength. Building our collective power between SUs and student-led grassroots organisations, because that is where our power lies. It's about solidarity, because of course solidarity is foundational to unity. Solidarity between students in FE and HE, solidarity between undergrads and postgrads, solidarity between home students and international students. But it's also about seeing our struggle as interconnected with our siblings across the global student movement. Our siblings in the October 22nd movement in Uganda fighting against fees, our siblings in South Africa doing the same, and we're going to hear from one of those folks this evening, which is exciting. It's about seeing our struggle also as interconnected with all of the academics, the non-academic workers on our campuses, our universities, our colleges, that make these experiences of exploitation that we've had throughout this pandemic just that bit more survivable. Because we're all facing the same thing, we're all facing the same system. And this is about fighting for demands that bring together the voices of organisers and officers up and down the 4 nations of the UK to address our collective exploitation now, and to move towards a free, accessible, truly lifelong education system. It's about seeing these things as inextricably linked as we collectively forge a pathway towards demarketized, democratized, decolonized education. A system of education that belongs to the students, staff and communities it exists to serve. So we're not going to let this government divide and rule. We're going to see the numbers of us, the variety of us, the vastness of our movement as our greatest strength. Across student unions and grassroots student organising groups, we will find the places that our campaigning and our organising can converge through this umbrella of the Students Deserve Better campaign, under which all of those seeking justice and liberation for students and for those with whom we stand in solidarity, you are all welcome to stand with us. And we can put forward our collective demands. So what are our demands? We demand economic justice. We need a true student support package that recognises the financial hardship and exploitation that students have been subjected to. The Westminster Government has shirked their responsibility for students. And if we were going to even see them begin to match some of the things that other nations, other governments have stepped up to do, this would be upwards of £700 million towards students, money directly in students' pockets. But of course, that only addresses this year. We need to make sure that in no year students should be experiencing this kind of hardship. And so that's why we're talking also about bringing back the EMA, the Education Maintenance Allowance, and maintenance grants, not loans, grants, in line with a student living income. And finally, but definitely last but not least, when it comes to this set of demands around economic justice, we're talking about for all students across the 4 nations of the UK, seeing the restoration of free education, making sure that we're underwriting education, not just this year, but every year, seeing a pathway through the exacerbation of how flawed it is to have a system based on fees this year. Students are not customers. Education is a public good and it needs to be funded as such. So let's see this as a route, not only to getting justice this year, which is absolutely needed, and to making sure that nobody pays fees this year, but to making sure that nobody pays fees ever again. We also demand academic justice. We're talking about academic mitigation in every sense of the word, and thinking about things like automatic extensions for postgrads, options to make up for missed learning for all students, and so much more. But we're also talking in FE then about keeping unsafe exams cancelled. FE students, and particularly BTEC students and vocational students, have been pushed from pillar to post, treated like the forgotten cousin all of the time, consistently throughout this pandemic, from the A-levels fiasco to where we find ourselves now, and it's just not good enough. And we're also calling for an end to digital poverty. We know that digital poverty disproportionately impacts Black and brown, disabled and working class communities. And we can't go on knowing that so much of our access to education hinges on our access to the internet, our access to this crucial infrastructure. And yet there's so much disparity in what we're facing. So those are our demands. I'm going to pause there because honestly, the lineup of speakers is hitting differently tonight. So you lots don't need to hear from me anymore. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our opening speaker, who is Belle Ribeiro Addy. It is truly a joy and an honor to invite Belle to speak with us this evening. Many of you, I'm sure, in fact, all of you will probably know who Belle is, what Belle does. Belle was elected MP for Streatham in South London in 2019. And she says that she stands on a platform that might not get much love from the Daily Mail, but that lives by the values of her community that has given her so much. And a fun fact to add on to that, she was also NUS Black Students Officer back in 2010. A keen former member of our community and a love supporter now. So thank you so much, Belle, for joining us. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Larissa. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. And thank you so much for everything you do. I've seen many NUS presidents go past, and I think the way that you've handled, in particular, the past year has been amazing. So, you know, well done. And the NUS are lucky to have you. And just solidarity with students right across the country. We know that the government has completely failed you during this pandemic, and it's right. And I'm supporting the cause. Students deserve better, absolutely. But it shows, just as Larissa touched on, what happens when education is treated like a commodity rather than a right. It shows just how it can spiral into the situation we're in at the moment, where students are not receiving the best quality of education. Students are constantly being duped in some way by their universities and all of the different institutional issues that they face in between. Now, from students at Pimlico School to students who are fighting institutional racism there, from the students that stood up over the A-levels fiasco, and to students fighting to decolonize our education, and those that have gone out to march with Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion, to all of you, you are an inspiration. And you completely squash the idea that, you know, students are not engaged in certain issues and they don't care. Now, I'm a member of Parliament, a backbench Labour MP under arguably what is the worst government we've seen since governments in this country began. And they have an 80-seat majority, and so it can be really, really bleak at times. But to see the great work that NUS is doing on these issues and students right up and down the country really does give us hope for the future. Now we can see the way in which they're trying to curb the right for you to voice your concerns over all of these different issues coming through the policing, crime, sentencing and courts bill, the approach that they've shown there, and the general authoritarian drive that the government has put down, you know, stifling our right to vote, our right to peaceful protest, the right to strike. All of these are hard-won, hard fought for democratic rights. And all of these rights are currently under threat. I mean, there was a time way back when in halls of residence, all of you living there would be automatically registered to vote. Imagine being automatically registered to vote. But what they noticed is this was having a major impact on who was being elected in those areas. So completely thrown it away. So all of these little different things are all intended to silence what we know is coming. And what we know is coming is more austerity, because that's what this government does when it falls into economic crisis. And we know there continue to be so many different institutional issues. I mean, I saw a tweet recently, and it was referring to the ban of the hijab in France. And it was talking about this obsession with how we dress and how we wear our hair, having nothing to do with liberation, but everything to do with control. That type of control is right up and down our different institutions, and our universities and our colleges are no exception. And this new race report that's come out that said that institutional racism does not exist. What an absolute disgrace, what an absolute insult to all of the students that continue to face this across the country. And that idea that all we have to do is work harder. That's the problem. It's not us. We're not working harder. We have issues from here and issues from there. That's just the government outsourcing more blame than changing what the issues are within these different institutions, within our universities, within our colleges, all those different things that hold us back for various intersectional reasons. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous that they're taking this route. It's dangerous that they continue to ignore students' voices right up and down the country. And we need to be able to, understand what's going on. Firstly, coming in through legislation. A lot of the legislation is going to be awful. We need to be kind of reinvigorated in our fight back, because it's going to get worse, I would say, before it gets better. But more importantly, I think you need to keep doing what you're doing. Following this past year, students have shown that they are not a voice that can be silenced easily, and they will try. And so just keep fighting. There are those of us who are behind you. You should know who we are by now. If you don't, hopefully we'll all make ourselves known to you throughout the coming years. But there are those of us who are behind you. So solidarity to the NUS and all the student unions up and down the country. Keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belle. Honestly, it's an honour to have you with us. You're getting loads of rapturous thanks in the chat from people thanking you for your support. And we honestly, really do appreciate you being with us this evening. And those wise words from Belle about us coming together and continuing to resist as students serve as a reminder that we're going to be doing some actions during this rally today. So the first action coming at you right now is about signing the petition if you haven't already. So get on that link in the chat right now. So now for our next speaker, coming up, we have with us Ellie Kidd. Ellie is from Coleg Cambria in the north of Wales and is currently studying BTEC. Ellie's going to be speaking about why it is so vital that FE students demand justice, and I'm so excited. And I can see Becky, our NUS Wales president, is very excited in the chat as well. Wales represents. So yes, Ellie, are you with us? Yes, I can see you now. Hi.
Hi. Hi, I'm Ellie Kidd. I'm here to talk about BTEC and how BTEC students have been completely shut down in the past as well, but completely over the pandemic. So basically I'm a level 3 BTEC student. Last year I did a level 2 BTEC, and in high school I also took BTEC, so I'm very experienced in the BTEC sort of world. So basically, like my history in BTEC is my whole education, and they've constantly sort of let us down. And I think like a big issue in that is that BTEC is led in England, and like this is a national problem, but how can people in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland be studying a BTEC that's led in England, and you can't really contact them because they're in England, and sometimes the content just misses a little bit. As well as that, I think like there's a genuine identity crisis of BTEC. A lot of the time on the internet, on social media, something's called a BTEC something, and that means the less the less good, the worst version of something. I really don't think that's fair, because a level 3 student can take their level 3 BTEC, do quite well, do the coursework, and it does include exams on a lot of courses, and go to university just like an A-level student can. So I don't really see why it is the less than version, and I think that is a view or something maybe in the media that needs to be addressed. As well as that, we have had a nightmare with BTEC in the pandemic. I have time and time again been popping off on Twitter, speaking out, contacting BTEC, because it's just not good enough. Often I know that it hasn't been great for GCSE and A-level students, and I do not deny that, but BTEC will leave it till the night before the results come out to tell us what's happening. I just think it's not on at all. It's completely inappropriate. They are a professional body. They need to be doing a better job. They are doing us a disservice. They're obviously not operating well enough to give us the information that we need. I think it's completely disgusting, and it's letting down so many students across the country. So I just think overall BTECs have had a rough time of it in the media, and we need to sort of turn that around. I obviously, like myself, I'm not entirely sure how we can sort of, especially the BTEC being the less than of something, you know, just because a BTEC includes coursework doesn't mean that we're not doing the work, because we are doing the work. We're reading the content. We work incredibly hard for our grades. So I think that it's awful. As well as that, they sent BTEC students to do exams that I'm not sure count anymore, because not all of the students could turn up during the pandemic. They told the night before that they were doing the exams, and then the next day they cancelled the exams completely. Again, it's just completely inappropriate. They need to realise they're a professional body, and there's not room for whatever they think that they're doing. I've seen a lot of people sort of debating the coursework. I think that BTEC doing the coursework doesn't mean that we don't do exams. We actually do still do. In my last course, we did 2 exams, so we do still do exams. I think that's a common misconception of BTEC as well, but the coursework's incredibly hard sometimes, and I would actually go as far to say it's harder than the exam in some cases. And I just think that it suits people better to be doing the coursework. It suits me a lot better to be able to work through that coursework not at my own pace, but you know, somewhat to my own pace, and make sure that I'm getting the work done, getting the content done. I find exams myself incredibly stressful, so BTEC's just better for me, and because that's better for me doesn't mean that I'm less than someone who's doing A levels. And like, obviously as a student, I realise A levels have had a hard time too, but you know, I think BTEC have got a lot of issues, and the fact that it's not devolved is a massive one, because it's based in England and I'm in Wales. But yeah, I think for me, BTEC has had a bit of a rough time, obviously, but they are, like I said, they are a professional body, and they're doing students an incredible disjustice with how they are handling what they are putting out, how they are changing their minds like Boris does. They're doing about 10 U-turns a week, and it's just not appropriate. They need to be putting students at the heart of what they're doing, and they're really not doing that for me. It's causing BTEC students an incredible amount of stress. I know that last results day, I cried when I found out I wasn't getting my results, because all of my friends were getting their results for A levels, and they at 5 p.m. the night before decided to say, you're not getting your results. It was very distressing for me, because I thought I wasn't getting any result at some point. And they just sort of they left it. That's what they decided to do. And obviously, to some degree, a lot of the courses are vocational courses. My course has, because I'm a sports student, a lot of practical modules that I haven't been able to do. And they let the courses back who need to be back, but I would argue that my course needed to be back, and a lot of courses needed to be back that were not deemed needed to be back. So again, it's just BTEC not sticking up for us, not making sure that we're getting what we need, and making actually part of our course mandatory to pass that is practical, but we haven't been able to do the practical. So I just think the disjustice that BTEC is doing to its students is very worrying. And if they carry on getting away with it, it's possibly going to get out of control because they're going to feel like they can get away with it. It's just not something I think they should be able to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. You've had so much support in the chat. I've been watching it go past. Everyone is saying you're absolutely right. There shouldn't be this kind of disparity between what BTEC students and other students have been experiencing. And you know, in one of the comments of support, Aisha said in the chat that the BTEC slander is rooted in classism. And I think that's absolutely right. We know that BTECs, that vocational courses, the other vocational courses and so on, are disproportionately taken by working class students, disproportionately taken by Black and brown students. And so, to be honest, it's no surprise that is consistently left behind, that's consistently forgotten. When policies are being made, when things are being put out, you always see that, you know, last year and coming through to now, BTECs are waiting to hear, and the uncertainty and stress that that's been causing. Honestly, solidarity to you, Ellie, to all the students that you've been working with, and just want to thank you so much for that speech. And here's another action coming at you folks ahead of the next speech. And it's to sign this petition around supporting BTEC students and vocational students otherwise as well, to make sure that BTEC students aren't left behind, just as Kieran has said there in the chat. So thank you so much for that, Ellie. A great speech, as folks are saying. There's, do you know what, and I'm clocking that there's, you know, there's a good 100 of you in here, so those petition numbers should be going up. You lot need to send it to people, send it in your group chats, make sure people better know. So coming up next, we're going to have a speech, another speech coming at us from the legendary Zara Sultana, who I believe is with us in the panelist section. So Zara is MP for Coventry South, as I'm sure you all know, and as a Warwick Uni student, that is close to my heart. Zara has been a tireless campaigner for students in Parliament. She's made history when opening her own student loan letter in the House of Commons. And before becoming an MP, she was also extremely active in the student movement and in NUS. So again, another great friend of ours. So thank you so much, Zara, for being here, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Larissa. Hi, everyone. My name is Zara Sultana. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Coventry South, and it's truly a pleasure to be amongst comrades tonight. I know what a difficult year this year has been, and the past year for students. You guys were promised a normal university experience. You were encouraged to sign accommodation contracts, only to find yourselves locked down, charged fees and fenced off from the accommodation that you're still being charged for. And there was a moment where the Tories even scapegoated you for rising COVID cases. It is totally disgraceful, and I stand in absolute solidarity with all of you fighting back and pushing for economic, racial and academic justice. And today I particularly want to extend my solidarity to students at Queen Mary's who have been targeted with evictions. It is totally unacceptable for student organisers of rent strikes to be targeted in this way. So I join students, my colleague and my comrade Absana Begum, who is the Labour Member of Parliament for the area, and she has spoken out on this issue in calling for these evictions to end. Like Larissa mentioned, I was very active within the National Union of Students myself, and my political life began in the student movement. Just before I went to university, the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government tripled tuition fees, and they also scrapped the education maintenance allowance. That was an attack on working class access to education. So I found myself in the first cohort of students charged £9,000 tuition fees, meaning that I have around £50,000 of student debt. And that, of course, increases by a couple of £1,000s in interest every single year. And I showed my student loan statement in Parliament right at the very beginning of last year. Students at the time fought very hard against that rise in tuition fees, and they built the largest student movement this country had seen in decades. It got me and a huge number of other people active in politics. And I truly wouldn't be in Parliament today if it wasn't for that fight. And while we didn't win, we know that that fight isn't over, because you guys have picked up the baton. Back then, we weren't just fighting against rising fees. We were fighting against a whole marketized higher education system. that treats students as a source of revenue, not as learners. And it's because of that marketized system that students today are still being treated so disgracefully. It's not simply bad luck or mean management that's created this situation. Universities and the government needed you guys back at university. That marketized higher education system and that model needed rents and it needed fees because the whole model depends on it, even if that means bringing back students onto campuses when it isn't safe. So yes, we have to demand universities cancel rents with no punishment for strikers. And we've seen heroic wins at universities across the country. But of course, we need to go beyond that, from demanding better mental health services for students at university to an immediate support package for students who have been hit financially hard during the pandemic. Also, we need to restore maintenance grants and build a whole new model for higher education. One where you don't have to pay fees this year, next year, or any other year, because we need an education model that recognizes education and access to learning as a right, not as a commodity to be bought and sold. So let's fight to abolish fees for good and for public, democratically run universities that put education and student and staff well-being at the heart of everything they do. For me and so many others, the rent strikes this year have been inspiring. They've shown that we don't have to sit back and just accept what we're given, the scraps that we're given. When students stand up and fight back, you've shown that you can win. So let's mobilize that energy. Let's fight for justice for students, for academics, for our entire communities. And let's win that free education that we want for good. That's what me, Belle, and others in the Socialist Campaign Group are fighting for in Parliament. And we will always have your back in those struggles. Solidarity, and thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you so much, Zara. Your solidarity is always so appreciated. You're getting so much love in the chat there. If we're in person, there would be so much applause. So thank you so much. It's truly appreciated that you've given up your time to be here this evening. And it was very apt there that you mentioned the evictions happening and the ways that students are being treated and the ways that resistance is trying to be quelled, because next up we've got a student coming straight at us from Queen Mary. So Sim Sagar. Sim is one of hundreds of students currently engaged in a rent strike at Queen Mary's University of London, and they're currently campaigning against unfair evictions. And I know I've been sharing the actions so far, but I think Sim is going to be sharing an action with us this time around. So Sim, please do take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Larissa. So yeah, I'm Sim. Hey. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm from Queen Mary Rent Strike. But before I speak, the Wi-Fi here at Queen Mary isn't that great yet. They still charge us really extortionate rents. So if I cut out, I'm really sorry. But yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about Queen Mary's Rent Strike, the work we've done, but also the problems that students and halls are currently facing with the evictions. If I can ask while I speak for everyone to find some paper and a pen to make a solidarity sign for those who've been evicted, that would be really great. But first I'll speak a bit about the strike. So I think Larissa wanted me to speak a bit about how our strike's unique, in that it follows on from a long history of rent strikes here used here in the East End as a form of resistance. We've been really sure to educate our strikers a bit about this resistance and how housing has just been an endemic problem in East London for decades. This anti-racist history of rent strikes being used here in East London has been really key to our campaign. So we've hosted a lot of political education events in order to tell people a bit about how collective resistance to racist housing policies has been used by Bengali squatters here in the 70s, like right here in Tower Hamlets, and stuff like that. I think that the history of rent strikes and the anti-racist roots are really crucial in understanding how we can draw from these campaigns and incorporate their tactics that they use, but also their aims in today's rent strikes, because they're entirely interconnected. To truly look at a future of a decolonized, democratized and demarketized education system, we need to understand this history and draw from it. And now a bit about our strike. So we've actually got 350 strikers, and so far we've managed to secure a discount and a partial refund from QM. This has been kind of like a really good thing, seeing as we've had a complete lack of support from our student union and a lack of engagement from management. But it's also been very tough, burnout's very real, and this definitely hasn't been helped by the way that Queen Mary is currently treating us. This is because they're currently evicting students, many of whom are on strike, from halls, myself included. So I'm going to speak a bit about this and the need for solidarity with us here at QM who are being evicted at an astronomical rate in comparison to other universities. Since September, 20 of us have been evicted, and a lot of these have been for minor fire safety offences such as tampering with fire alarms or smoking indoors. In my own case, I was given less than 24 hours notice to attend a meeting with management in which I could state my case and explain the reason behind my offence and for breaking rules. This ended extremely abruptly despite my obvious distress during the meeting. Management were extremely blunt with me, and I explained that I'm 19 turning 20. I currently have no parents here in the UK, so I have no family home to go to. I explained that this is overly punitive, given the context of the pandemic and the current ban on evictions by the government for people who are tenants, not licensees though. The fact they've been so harsh against us and against all students for minor offences is questionable. And it's been made even more questionable given my vocality about the rent strike and the huge rent strike banner outside my window. Whilst we at QM Rent Strike definitely agree with the need for fire safety to be taken really seriously, evictions for these offences are just disproportionate and too harsh a punishment. Many other universities don't have this kind of system in place of evictions for a first-time offence, but instead have warning systems in place, which led us to question, why is QM so harsh? So after submitting a lot of FOIs, we managed to find out that this is, clearly disproportionate to our London counterparts, such as UCL, LSE, KCL. But it's actually also a disproportionate number to every other university here in the UK, which have all evicted either 0 or less than 5 students this year, and none for fire safety reasons. This is also a pattern. From 2017 to 2019, QM evicted 111 students. For comparison, UCL evicted less than 5 students in the same time period, and none of these were for fire safety offences again. These evictions have placed so many of us under undue stress, not to mention we're still expected to keep on top of our work whilst being made homeless in a literal pandemic. Other students have told us that, they really have been made homeless. Fortunately, I do have sisters here in the UK who I can stay with, although this has really disrupted everything for me. But other students have been made homeless. They've been forced to couch surf with friends, with family. They can't tell their parents they've been evicted, and they've been forced to find accommodation in shelters and stuff like that. QM's also failed to help some of the students who wanted to apply for hardship funds during this time. And we're also all facing do not rehouse flags being added to our files, charges in admin costs, and having our academic departments notified about our evictions. Here at QM Rent Strike, we definitely believe there's a double standard going on, whereby Queen Mary is disproportionately evicting their students, many of whom are on rent strike, for breaching fire safety rules, yet they're also continuously failing to uphold health and safety standards on their part. This is because after we met with some of our health and safety reps at QM, UCU and Unison, we found that QM's fire risk assessments from last year show that the standards have been neglected in halls. This is due to timber cladding going unchecked on some of the halls of residence, and also unsafe fire doors and stuff like that. I think in my own halls, my fire escape is actually made out of cladding and it hasn't been tested. So, but yeah, we're really calling on everyone here at conference to show their support with those who have been evicted. We definitely need solidarity for all QM organisers like myself, and also evicted students like myself. And we really want you to support our demands, which are to 1, halt all evictions currently taking place in QM halls. 2, rehouse all evicted students effective immediately. And 3, adopt comprehensive eviction mitigation measures to protect evictions for minor offences or to make evictions a last resort. Please check out our social media about this to see how you can help. I think that Connor's linking some stuff in the chat. And please make sure to send the email template to management and boost our actions online surrounding all of the evictions. If everyone can also, with your paper and pen, take a selfie, write a slogan on it, like maybe one of our demands, or like rehouse evicted students, or just stop evicting students QM, and also put one of our hashtags underneath. You can put stop evicting students QM, or be wary of Queen Mary, or hashtag no more evictions Queen Mary, something like that. That would be really great. And that's all I have to say so far. But yeah, we would really, really appreciate a lot of support. That's what NUS is for, after all. And we really need you to help us step up for everyone who's being evicted at QM.
Thank you, Sim. Absolutely smashing it over at QM. I was looking down during your speech because I was trying to write my thing. I'm very bad at anything artistic. I'm actually just writing letters, so I don't know how that's artistic. But we moved. Sim, you absolutely smashed it. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your experience, that of all the students that you're organising with, and how we can stand in solidarity with you folks and your demands. So please do follow the links in the chat, folks, in a call to make sure that we're supporting, showing our solidarity with those being evicted and those being threatened with eviction at QM. So now that we've heard some of those ways that students, you know, Ellie spoke to us about being a BTEC student. Now Sim has spoken to us about being a student in HE, and we're flipping back now because we're going to Helen Lawley, the legendary president at Dudley College SU, who has been a relentless voice for FE students and has campaigned for free school meals. And she's here to speak about the need for maintenance funding for students at all levels of further education. So Helen, are you ready? Are you going to take the floor? I don't know if Helen, can you hear me? Okay, if Helen isn't,
I can hear you, but my video won't start.
Oh, that's annoying. Do you want us to come back to you in a second, or are you good with it?
Apparently you guys have disabled it, so hang on then. Oh, hang on.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Helen.
Hi. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. You make me blush. But good evening, everyone. I'm so honoured to have been asked to make a statement at this rally. I'm Helen. I'm the proud president of Dudley College Student Union, with a membership of 14,000 students, as diverse and dynamic as our rally today. As you may have noticed, I am a mature student. I have children, I have grandchildren, and this fight is for them. An equitable education system must meet the needs of all of our society. I have been in and out of college over my lifetime, and I have seen firsthand the impacts of punitive measures that have sidelined so many of our members. The introduction of tuition fees and subsequent hikes left friends and family of mine starting to believe that university was a dream that they'd never achieve. The abolition of grants and fair maintenance that left so many wondering if their dreams of higher education were scuppered forever. That, combined with an increased cost of living, wages that have not increased in line with inflation, spiralling housing prices and sky-high rental costs, of all things that have had impacts on society that are leaving an everlasting scar on a generation upon generation. Educational maintenance allowance, or shortened to EMA, is one of those measures that I've been talking about, and with its loss left students in England the choice between eating and catching the bus into college. Scotland, Ireland and Wales still offer EMA, an income assessed allowance that helps students with the cost of further education. The allowance was scrapped in England July 2011, And at that time, Dudley College, 78% of our 16 to 19 cohort qualified for the £30 a week allowance. We have members drawn from some of the poorest wards in the whole of the country. And at the time, the union campaigned hard to try and place pressure on these decision makers. We hit national headlines with our on-site rally and class walkouts, but with few concessions made to no avail. The news was a devastating blow to our students, replaced by a bursary scheme. In the main controlled providers, students lost their autonomy over how to spend their allowance. The arguments made at the time for the removal of EMA have been the same recycled arguments and tropes against students we hear time after time. The myth that students are reckless, not just with money, but as we've seen through the pandemic and the national headlines, apparently with lives. A myth that we have enough to survive, and the reason we don't is that we waste money on alcohol, fashion fads, and lattes, for goodness sake. A myth peddled by those in positions of power that have absolutely no idea what it's like to make a choice between your children's new shoes or putting the heating on. I know, I've been there. The apprentice struggling with barely livable wage that doesn't meet the cost to eat, let alone splash out on an avocado brunch, knows has been there. The single parent holding down a job and studying for a better future knows they've been there. The working class student in accommodation with sky-high rents and no loan left knows they've been there. We all know, and students deserve better. Lifelong learning and further education sector has been toppled by this pandemic, and students have come, as usual, at the sharp end. Years of chronic underfunding in the FE sector has led to a loss of our support services, now most in need. Our mentors, our counsellors, and our student unions, just to name a few. COVID highlighted very starkly the lack of funding. When the pandemic hit, students were hit harder than before. Not having equipment to do their course, having to share devices and spaces with parents working from home and siblings doing their schoolwork. I took call after call from distressed students without the means to learn from home, either because of the lack of technology, Wi-Fi, or both. After many months of students using intermittent Wi-Fi and trying to take lessons using their mobile devices, the college received some laptops to loan out, crumbs to the table. In addition to this, I have seen further poverty with hunger coming from distress factor of life of many of those that I represent. My predecessors campaigned for free meals at Dudley, supporting the AOC for their statement across FE. A great win, but unfortunately not far enough. I've seen students not eligible and going hungry. I've seen students treated like second-class citizens in their own college canteens because options were limited to £2.33 meal deal. And that what you get is water and a very plain sandwich. Now with the pandemic hitting us, we've had to witness the absolutely atrocity of MPs voting down the extension of free college meals into the holiday periods. After students like me and you campaigned alongside influential figures, community members and celebrities, as much needed U-turn was achieved. but why find ourselves in this position? There's so much to fight for and many more wins to achieve. Let's stay strong and united and among unmoving belief that we will attain, because students deserve better.
Look at the chat. Honestly, Helen, everyone is saying how much you smashed it. So thank you so much for that. Nah, honestly, the voice was going because there was too much fire. There was too much fire, and your voice couldn't.
Always.
No, so thank you so much for that, Helen. Honestly, so energizing just to hear, and also to think about, you know, we are, as Zara said, picking up the baton of those fights that have been had, and we have to keep and sustain that energy. So thank you so much for that. So next on, I'm gonna head over to James. James is currently education officer, but also president-elect, so round of applause necessary, at Bangor, and is going to be speaking to academic justice, because he's been campaigning around mitigating circumstances and no detriment to benefit the students of Bangor. And as I said earlier, that's so crucial in being part of the demands that we're putting forward. So James, are you ready to take the floor?
Yep, I think so.
Amazing.
1 second. Yeah, so hi everyone. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak here, and solidarity to the previous speakers for your really inspiring speeches. As Larissa said, my name is James and I'm the Vice President for Education at Bangor, and also the President-elect. And for those of you who don't know where that is, it's right in the northwest corner of Wales, just above Snowdonia. So a pretty nice scenic area of the UK, but unfortunately, our students are still plagued by the issues brought about by the pandemic, and we've been fighting hard for academic justice and mitigation for our students, like all other SUs have during this difficult time. Academic mitigation comes in many forms, and one of the most difficult aspects of achieving this year is that there was no defined advice for universities from government or bodies such as the Quality Assurance Agency or the OIA, and the message from them seemed to imply that this year was business as usual and that students were not going to be affected any more than a typical academic year. And this is, of course, absolute rubbish, as this has been the most difficult year for students in recent memory, arguably more difficult than the last academic year, as students have had an entire year of their studies interrupted by lockdowns and travel bans and all the other stresses and problems that are caused by the pandemic. However, this has forced us to work together and collaborate with other SUs on presenting our demands and recommendations to universities. I work closely with NUS Wales and other sabbatical officers to share recommendations and policies that have been received well by universities, and also the ones which weren't received well, in the hopes of having a more united approach. And I'd like to thank Becky, the NUS Wales president, for her help and support with all of that. One of the things I campaigned for in Bangor was the introduction of 24-hour exams at the start of the year. This was essential, as the original format of the 2-hour exams at 9 AM just wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't suitable for the international students who have been stuck at home at home in their countries. And you might be aware that if you're in America and you have an exam at 9 o'clock in the morning GMT, you'll actually have it at sort of like 2 or 3 in the morning, which is just not acceptable. And also, with schools being closed across the UK, students who are parents have had to adopt a more fluid schedule to accommodate childcare responsibilities, and having fixed exams just isn't appropriate for them. Therefore, as an SU and with NUS Wales, we decided that a blanket 24-hour exam policy was really the bare minimum that all universities should be offering this year. We also lobbied our university here at Bangor to implement a safety net policy, as this would not have been possible without the student movement supporting us with petitions and on the ground student testimonials that persuaded the university upper management to actually listen to us. We had a student petition which reached almost 500 signatures, which was extremely powerful, as we're only quite a small university up here in North Wales. And I'd encourage all students and officers listening to carry on lobbying your university for a safety net policy if they haven't already implemented one, and to make sure you challenge your university if the policy that they have implemented isn't strong enough and doesn't suit your needs. Because with enough lobbying from students and students' unions, they'll have to change it to be more suitable. And the government needs to understand that students have missed out on a lot this year, from placements being cancelled to students not being able to access their learning due to unsuitable environments at home for working. I've actually been talking to the School of Education here at Bangor, and we've discussed the possibility of lobbying government to provide more funding for new teachers to access more training during their first year of their teaching jobs to make up for the lack of in-person placements during the pandemic. And I think this is something that all universities and students' unions should be lobbying for moving forward, to ensure that our teachers have enough learning time before being thrown in the deep end into that teaching job. The UK government also needs to realise that many students are still experiencing digital hardship, which is ruining their academic experience, as they do not have access to good internet connection and don't have the funds to purchase a computer which can actually handle all of this new software which is now required to participate in online learning in the first place. This pandemic has deepened the divide between students, and it's shown us that students who come from low socio-economic backgrounds, disabled students, international students, and many more are having a much worse university experience than other students, and governments and universities need to offer as much support for them as possible. So thank you very much for listening, and keep up the fight, because students do deserve better.
Thank you so much, James. Honestly, when you were talking about like the disproportionate impact on students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, international students, all of that, disabled students, it's so true. And we need to keep fighting to make sure that the most marginalized students get better, because they deserve better. And all of us can secure that collectively. Just a brief reminder to folks in the chat, if you could please only use 1+, just to make sure that we're not kind of overdoing it in the chat, because it's not so accessible for folks with screen readers and so on. So when we're talking about disableism manifesting institutionally in these ways, let's make sure that we're not kind of reproducing that ourselves. But thank you folks for your, I know it's coming from a place of enthusiasm, but let's make sure that it's still accessible for everyone. So thank you again so much for that, James. You know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to come at you with another action. And it's actually more so of a put this in your calendar because it's coming up, because on the 16th, Ease the Fees and Write Off Right Now, both of whom have been supporting this rally, are hosting a day of action. And so put it in your calendar, follow them on social, support the work, make sure that we're giving energy and amplifying the work of folks at the grassroots. So just to repeat, that's on the 16th coming up. Please do support. So our next speaker, I'm very, very, very excited to announce. We're coming next to Grian Ni Gavin, who honestly, if you don't follow Grian on Twitter, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? Grian always has the hot takes, and I'm sure we're gonna get some this evening. So I'm gonna, without further ado, hand over to the wonderful president of Queen's University Belfast Students' Union, who has been ceaseless in fighting for justice for her students, from unionising student staff to running a Students Deserve Better group on campus. Honestly, what haven't you done? Please do take the floor.
Thank you, Gurmaigov. Folks, I think my internet is a wee bit patchy, so let me know if it's absolutely awful, but I can't do anything if I'm speaking too fast. That's just the way that I speak. So Ning Yart go Curla Kayla, there's no strength without unity. That's what students across the UK and Ireland have proven this year. Omi Martha Nuri, Dustage MacLean, na Hurlashi of Yaku, Hona good Strachelt, a Hurham Kin, Mar Scholarly, Extadger, Mar Chinonti, Mar MacLean International, August Mardini, a Leggy Shees, August a Yanter Noy Ardra, who arrest August Aristella, Ach, couple of Meohan, Vibu Bogagin. From March last year, and I'm got anything I do in Irish, I'll do it in English as well, don't worry. From March last year, students have used the tools at their disposal to highlight their struggles as students, tenants, disabled students, international students, parents, carers, workers, and an ever-changing community who have been let down and ignored time and time again. But a few weeks ago, we had a wee win with hundreds of students signed up, after hundreds of students had signed up to our local Students Deserve Better group, and as well we're taking part in the national movement in NUS USA for Students Deserve Better. We secured a £500 COVID disruption payment for home GB and EU students, full-time students. Around 40,000 students in the north were qualified for this payment, but that was out of 200,000. Larian and Exelax of Falsey Shaw and the Fiben and Mora in our Gorish. The disparity in this policy exposed so many of the problems in this marketised and not fit for purpose education system we're forced to study, live and work in. International students, as you know, have no recourse for public funds due to the racist immigration system they have to go through. And in the North, the majority of our Black students and international and our students of colour are international students. As we work to decolonise and demarketise our education system, we need to make sure that these students are properly supported by scrapping the inhumane hostile environment policy as well. As well as that, part-time students who are largely mature students, working class students, parents and carers have also been denied the support, and we'll have to keep fighting to make sure that all of those students who have been left out of that payment are getting the support that they need. As well as that, students earlier this year were told to come up to Belfast because they would get in-person teaching. Our devolved government and Stormont have told us time and time again that their hands are tied when it comes to the private rented sector, which now means landlords in areas like the Holy Lands, where I live, continue to trap students in these contracts that their universities told them to take out. They're a threat of increase in rents, and they're open to exploitation, as they have been for decades here. We're told the power doesn't sit in Stormont, and we know that Westminster barely cares about anything in the north at the best of time, let alone a small area of a highly populated student HMO area. Another massive issue that we have been dealing with at Queen's is students in the private rented sector who have now also fallen victim to a cruel system of off-campus discipline. This system has existed for years, but this year they stepped it up a notch. At the minute, if a student receives a COVID notice of a COVID breach notice, the PSNI and the police here share that information with the university, and those students are suspended for 2 weeks, and they also have to pay a fine, not to the PSNI, but also to their university, and they have no right of appeal and no due process in this. This is also applicable within university accommodation and in dealing as well with university security, who feel that they can freely go in and out of student kitchens and student halls. Students have had, so while we have had this massive win, this money was put towards the end of the financial year, meaning universities and students' unions have been put under massive pressure to make sure that this money is spent, which indicates to us that maybe they don't want it spent at all. Students have had their health put at risk, their academic achievements threatened, their right to privacy abused, they've been plunged into debt and financial insecurity. And this will keep going unless we use this moment of mass anger and frustration the students are feeling at the minute. So my advice to anyone sort of going forward and sort of feeling, how do we make sure the students get what they deserve, get the better that they deserve? Tamisha Ra, Begi Radicach Agoni, always be radical and rooted. Marchen and Strackles Arai, the struggle will always go on. To Ira Deefhain, look after yourselves. Martinez Augustas and Fod Lakela, and stand and fight together always, because Tanis Farna Shaw Tilchugging, we deserve much, much better than this. So that's sort of my wee piece. Gurmila.
Thank you so much for that, Green. Honestly, once again, the chat is on fire. And I think there was just so much there about how this is rooted in something broader. I'm gonna keep coming back to that phrase now. Always be radical and rooted. I love that. I'm not gonna attempt to pronounce it in Irish. I will butcher it, but maybe I can learn some point soon. But yeah, thank you so much for that, Green. Truly wise words, and just another reminder to folks chiming in the chat, if we could just do 1+ to make sure that things are accessible. And do you know what, right now I'm coming at you with another action, I believe, because I think the way that Green links that to broader things and the broader issues that we have that we're fighting here is a perfect time to plug Liberate the University, which is a grassroots organisation led by students that is seeking the liberation of the university, as the title says. And so I've just put in the chat their link tree where you can sign their open letter, make a donation if you can, but I know lots of folks are struggling, so no pressure on that, but just to support, and their socials are there too, in case you want to follow. And Liberate the University have also been one of the folks supporting this rally, so please do show them some support back. So thank you again, Grian. I think next we are going to Kayla Megan Burns, who is the president of Strathclyde Students Association, has campaigned for Strathclyde to stop exploiting students during the pandemic, and she's going to be speaking to us about the need for urgent action on student funding and maintenance. Thank you so much, Kayla.
Larissa and Grian for that. That was fantastic. Hi everyone, my name is Kayla Burns and I'm the president at Strathclyde Students' Union in Glasgow. Just like all of you at Strathclyde, our students have faced challenges that we never could have imagined when we were campaigning for our positions. As officers, our jobs have been harder than ever before as well, as we face hurdle after hurdle of seemingly unending student issues. Battling everything from student rights in halls, tuition fees, to the right to a safe learning and teaching environment for our students and staff, and having to battle to get students even the basic requirements to be able to complete their studies in this new and ever-changing environment, such as access to university Wi-Fi and facilities to study, and the equipment for those dealing with digital poverty. It hasn't been all doom and gloom though, as throughout the year in Scotland and at our institution at Strathclyde, we've also had some fantastic wins to help with students dealing with these conditions. In September, we managed to get a COVID-19 scholarship set up straight away for students returning to university to help them with their fees if they'd been financially impacted by COVID. We've secured 12-week rent rebates for undergrad and postgraduate students in halls. We've increased our counselling provisions for students by 7 times their previous capacity. We've removed transcript fees, and we're currently in the process of having a comprehensive no detriment policy approved. This has resulted in a return of over nearly £4 million directly back into Strathclyde students' pockets, and it's at least gone a part of the way to deal with some of the welfare issues faced by students. This has all been amazing work, which I'm so proud to have completed, and I've no doubt that it's had a really positive impact on students. But the bottom line is, for the vast majority of our students, this still isn't enough. I want you to imagine a lecture theatre with 100 students in it. And this might feel like a bit of a forgotten memory at this stage, but out of those 100, 25 of those students are unable to pay rent, and 14 are relying on food banks in Scotland. We've of course all seen the crisis within student halls at the start of the year as well, with students locked in the houses of a deadly virus. There's a student rent crisis, with people paying thousands of pounds for rent in flats, which they haven't used or needed, after being totally misled by our government and institutions to believe that if we didn't return, we were risking missing out on vital learning, which never happened. I've spoken to students who've never set foot in Scotland, but have paid rent on accommodation since September and paid fees so high they could have easily bought the flat that they were renting in the first place. There's a learning crisis with many students, particularly those in practical subjects, where they haven't been able to do the placements needed for their course. So that they need to feel confident in going for the job that they want in the future. And none of this is their own fault. Researchers in many cases haven't been able to do the research that they needed to do, and PhD students have been left waiting for extensions to funding. We've seen policies and rules on students which often made sweeping generalizations about who and what students are, and it hasn't always, if ever, seen the nuances of student life. But again, what shocks me most is that we're still not even the worst in this situation. In Scotland, we were fortunate enough to have secured a total of £44 million in government support for students. And we're the only nation in the UK to have secured the right for students to leave their contracts in halls. And yet my inbox is still full to the brim with shocking situations that students are in. And that brings me to the bottom line here. that students have been undoubtedly ripped off throughout the pandemic, and we've been taken advantage of for long before that. So we so often talk about the marketization of education, and it's been mentioned numerous times this evening, but fundamentally, it's not true, as consumers have far more rights which students just aren't privy to. When a product is falsely advertised or a service is not fulfilled to the promised standard, consumers are entitled to a refund, or at least some sort of compensation, something which many of us have asked for, but none of us are yet to secure. As I mentioned before as well, in Scotland, it's taken a literal pandemic for students to get the same basic housing rights as normal tenants. And even then, this isn't a permanent change, but instead a temporary measure with a predetermined end date. And that's why I'm here, as our students deserve better. We deserve economic and academic justice, and for the reality of our situations to be recognised, both in the immediate term through support packages for students which genuinely recognises the hardships which we're facing, and measures such as no detriment policies, which ensure that students should never be at an academic disadvantage due to COVID restrictions, due to not being able to build portfolios, or access vital learning due to digital poverty, or even gain experience through no fault of their own. But we also deserve this type of justice in the long term by addressing the systematic issues that enable this type of destitution, upholding students' basic legal rights and safety, bringing back maintenance grants and abolishing tuition fees, as education is an investment in the future of our society, and it should never be reserved for only those that can afford it, whether that's financially or personally. Some of the fights I've described can be won by working as individual unions. However, the systematic problems are something which we must tackle on a national scale. This pandemic may end, but unless they're properly addressed, these injustices will not, because they're not new issues. These flaws predate COVID, and we cannot afford for them to be ignored any longer. Our journeys will all look different depending on each of our own circumstances, what type of student we are, what nation we're based in, but the bottom line remains the same. We deserve rights, we deserve education, and students deserve better. So solidarity, folks.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Honestly, the Scottish student movement has been smashing it at many a turn. It's becoming a running joke in our FTO team that you folks have had to deal with everything first. You've been the guinea pigs of the student movement, and boy, have you done it well. Like, honestly, I think everyone's been taking lessons from you folks. And you're so right, Kayla. This year has exposed that the idea that students are consumers is a lie. We might exist within a marketized system, but because education is a public good, because it's something we deserve, we don't have the rights of that system that we're supposedly within, and you smashed it on so many levels. Folks, you know I'm coming at you with another action. You're going to be sick of them by the end of this, but to be honest, this one I'm sorry, not sorry for, #Beyonce energy, because this is honestly something I'm very, very proud of. This is, NUS, we've been coming together with the Red Square movement, which is made up of a bunch of student-led grassroots organizations, some of which are kind of on the screen, part of this rally as well. The likes of the Rent Strike movement, of Liberate the University, of Pause or Pay, and some others. And we've been supported by the World Transformed in pulling together an organizing school, which is really trying to unpack all of these things, all of the energy that's in the student movement now, and harness it towards energy that sustains this momentum in the student movement. So I've put the sign up in the chat, and would love for folks to connect with that. So thank you again, Kayla. Please do check out that action. And I'm gonna take us swiftly on to our next speaker, who is Ellie Monroe. So Ellie is part of Pandemic PGRs, which is a group of postgraduate research students who have been organising for better conditions throughout the pandemic and doing it fantastically, if I may. And do you know what, pandemic PGRs, you lot must be some of the biggest people I've ever met, and continue to smash it, putting out reports, holding people to account, and doing it all amazingly. So Ellie, I'll hand over to you.
I just love policy, Larissa, like what can I say? Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Ellie Monroe. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Birmingham. I'm in my 4th year, which means I really should be writing my thesis, but here I am. And I'm representing Pandemic PGRs today. Just firstly to say thank you so much to everybody who's spoken before, and solidarity with all of your campaigns. I found this event really inspiring and moving and energizing as well, and it's just been great. And thanks to Larissa and to NUS for giving us this space, because PGRs, we quite often we fall between this this kind of gap between we're not quite staff and we don't always quite feel like students either. So it's really nice to kind of be included in these kinds of spaces. Pandemic PGRs itself is a really pretty informal grassroots campaign made up of volunteers. We've got 2 main campaigns. One is actually to get postgraduate researchers recognised as staff, and we work a lot with ECU on that. And the other one is about getting better support for PhD students and for all PhD students now during this pandemic. Our kind of central ask, and our ask all the way through, has been to get blanket automatic extensions for all PhD students, funded extensions for those students who, for those researchers who are funded, where we put it at 6 months, but we want to make sure that there is also extra available for those people who have caring responsibilities, or for disabled researchers, or for others who need it for other reasons. Unfortunately, UKRI, which is the largest funder of PhD students in the UK, or PhD research in the UK, has rejected this ask repeatedly. UKRI actually commissioned research from a research consultancy company called NatSen, and NatSen themselves recommended that UKRI provide a basic level of funded extension automatically to all PhD researchers that it funds, with options for extra kind of top-ups for those who need it. But UKRI, they didn't even acknowledge that this recommendation had been made to them. They just rejected it out of hand. UKRI has had the nerve to say to us repeatedly that its approach, which is to make us all apply for extensions to prove our case, to prove how disadvantaged we are during a global pandemic, to prove how difficult it is to do PhD research during a global pandemic, and to cap any extension now at 3 months, because obviously that's how long the pandemic has lasted. They have had the nerve to say that that approach is the fairest one, which I think stretches the definition of fair somewhat. We say that blanket automatic extensions are fairest because the kind of researchers who need it most are the kind of researchers who already have to prove their need, who already have to fill in form after form after form. If you've ever had to take a leave of absence, if you've ever had to take sickness absence, if you've ever tried to get any kind of support out of disability services, you will know what these systems are like. You will know what these forms are like, and you will have had to fill in 1 million of them. The point is, we're living and we're trying to research through a global pandemic. It shouldn't be controversial that we might need more time to do that research, and we might need more support to do that research. But we are not trusted with that issue. We are not trusted with that time. UKRI also says that time lost is actually not an adequate reason for getting an extension. I mean, honestly, what is an adequate reason for getting an extension if it's not time lost to a global pandemic? They wrote back in November in their long report, which is the basis for our own policy response, that labs were opening up, that archives were opening up, that field work was starting to get going, that other research sites were kind of becoming available. I had 3.5 hours in the archives. I do historical research. 3.5 hours in the archives last year. That's it for the whole of the year. And I'm meant to be writing a PhD on that basis. What on earth is a reason for an extension if not time lost? Their report and their views and their arguments are just divorced from the reality of being a PhD student right now. We need to make sure that all PhD researchers get the support that they need, and that includes people who are self-funding. Often the people in my office who are self-funding their own PhDs, they are people who are researching some of the most marginalized, the least often listened to communities, often communities from which they come themselves, but it's not necessarily fashionable research, or it's not necessarily research that they can get funded for all kinds of different ways. For them, actually, extensions might not be, they might be useful, but they might not be the key thing. Actually, they need all kinds of different support to replan, to rebudget, to reaccount for this extra time that their PhDs are going to take. And they need access to hardship funds. I am still hearing about universities now who do not allow postgraduate researchers to access their hardship funds. And that is outrageous. We are still registered students. We do not have access to benefits. Where else are we meant to go? And we also need to consider the needs of international researchers on that front as well, who, as somebody else has said, are barred from accessing state support, barred from accessing things like sick leave or leaves of absence even, and who might face, if they're on a tier 4 visa, who might face extra costs if they do get an extension, if they have to extend. The bottom line is, what do we want our universities to look like? We know right now that they're overwhelmingly white, cis male, non-disabled, hetero middle-class institutions. PhD researchers, in theory at least, are the kind of new generation of academics. But what our funders, universities and government are telling us is that you should only consider doing a PhD if you already fit that mold. If you've got caring responsibilities, don't even think about it. If you're disabled, chronically ill, neurodiverse, no chance. If you're not independently wealthy, you will not be supported if things go wrong. And that's what our institutions are going to continue to look like. And that's the institution that we will be stuck with if these policies don't change and if we don't get better support. This is a global pandemic. We are also staff. We do also teach. A lot of us have lost our jobs during this. A lot of GTA work has disappeared. I think those of us who do teach stand in solidarity with students. We also think that you're getting a rough deal. We need to make sure that we are working together on that front, because we're all getting a raw deal in this regard, and we all need to fight this and stand together.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and what a perfect note to end on around standing together. Actually, we did invite Jo, the Gen Sec of the UCU, to speak as well, to talk more about solidarity, but it's her birthday, so she said no. But she did send a lovely WhatsApp in solidarity. Ellie, honestly, as Matt has just said in the chat, you're doing amazing work. And we do want to share that work. So another action coming at you. First one, there's a letter template there. Ellie, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, but yeah, a letter template. So please do utilize that. And then the report that you did. Honestly, I don't know where, in what time you found the time to do the report, but we are so grateful for the report and for all the recommendations, because it's stuff that we can keep putting putting to decision makers in our meetings. So yeah, I don't know if you want to speak to those actions at all.
Yeah, shall I say on the letter, we're getting very little traction at the moment with parliamentarians. So if you do have time, it's not as easy as signing an open letter, and I'm sorry for that. But if you do have time to write to your MP and to share the letter, we've done a template there. We are not getting any feedback from the ministers. We have a different minister to kind of other students, undergraduate and taught students, the only way that we're going to get heard is if we make a lot more noise, essentially. Yeah, if anybody can raise it, then that'd be great.
Thank you so much, and I can see support, resounding support for PGRs there in the chat, and folks really wanting to support with those actions. So thank you so much, Ellie, for speaking, and hopefully we'll see some letters going to MPs soon. Okay. We are almost coming to close. We've got a couple more speakers before we round out. So stick with us, because they are a couple of really, really good ones. So next up, I'm going to be handing over to Neil Lewis. Neil is an international student from Guyana in South America and currently sabbatical officer at Greenwich SU. Neil's been working in student movements in his home country back in Guyana, and is no stranger to tackling governments on fees, as he successfully campaigned against value-added tax on tuition fees in Guyana. And during his time at Greenwich, Neil has been vocal about the importance of decolonizing universities and being anti-racist, and so I'm really, really excited to hear from Neil now. Neil, are you with us? Are you ready to take the floor?
I am here. Thank you, Larissa. Yeah. All right, so hi everyone, heard my name is Neil. Thanks for doing the introduction, Larissa. And currently, Greenwich Student Union Officer, and I'm also part of the Students United Against Fees movement, an amazing campaign aiming to work with sector partners that recognizes the plight of international students to ensure we get our money back this year. Now, tonight, as an international student from Guyana, South America, a former British colony, I'm here to bring an anti-racist, decolonizing perspective to the movement. First, let me say, though, that it's just absolutely amazing to listen and hear from all the other advocates demanding better, demanding justice for our education. There's a quote, I haven't identified the source, but it goes like this: irrespective of race, creed, and gender, education makes it possible for people to stand out as equal with all other persons from different walks of life. Overall, education is the platform that makes it possible to defeat all barriers. Now, since being in this country, I've heard this government talk about meritocracy and leveling up. Well, a fair education system is one that recognizes its faults and its history, and that is the way to achieve a meritocratic world. Leveling up and closing the disparities the government themselves found in their most recent race report, which I do not support, I denounce. But when we talk about decolonization, sometimes it's difficult to pin it down because it is so vast and exists in all aspects of our lives. And you're probably wondering, what does it have to do with fees? But tonight, I'm going to bring to you the facts, I'm going to bring to you the figures, and most importantly, bring to you the history. And at the end of it, hopefully you will recognize that education should be free, and it should be free for international students, particularly from the Global South. Now, Ovid Abrams writes in his book, A Message, The History and Culture of Guyana, that the system of education under British colonialism was purposely designed to keep the inhabitants of the colonies semi-literate under British servitude. From kindergarten, children learned songs such as Rule Britannia Rule, Britain never, never shall be slaves, God save our gracious Queen, and in Dublin fair city, where girls are so pretty, I first my eyes on sweet Molly Malone. Children learned British folk song and English country and dance rather than their own culture. The basic idea of these teachings was to instill in the local populace a feeling of inferiority, that anything that was British was superior to anything that was local in origin. And I promise you, actually, that any international student, like myself from the Global South, testify to the fact that this ideology still exists today, to the extent that, my school's shoes as a child, they were only good quality if they came from Britain. And this is important because clearly here we see the legacy of coloniality persisting in the Global South, reinforcing British superiority. And in the context of British higher education, this means that students from the Global South, their much smaller governments, and their hardworking parents have to find the finance up front to subsidize the empire's education system, as it was during slavery and colonialism. I too am a victim of this neo-colonialist thinking because studying in England will be seen by my local employers as superior to achieving a local education. And why is that? Because of the indoctrination of British superiority in the Global South only 60 years ago. Now, one of my favorite Pan-African scholars is Walter Rodney, not least because he too is Guyanese, but also because of his work on how Europe underdeveloped Africa. In his book, he points out that African soil, African labor in North Rhodesia, which is Zimbabwe today, produced vast wealth, but African children under colonialism had little access to that wealth for their schooling because it went to benefit European society, including their educational institutions. Men like Cecil Rhodes could leave a legacy of lavish scholarships to white students to study at Oxford University through his profits from the slave trade. Rodney shows as well that as late as 1959, this is just 60 years ago, Uganda under British rule spent £11 per head for African pupils, £38 for Indian pupils, and £186 for European children. Very clear racism that led to the underdevelopment of the Global South, very clear racism that occurred only 60 years ago, very clear racism that continues today, because now those same students who were indoctrinated are left with these ideas of British superiority, and they are the employers and parents of today who pay out of their noses for their children to attend British institutions. Free university fees for international students, it is justice, it is reparations. Now, the COVID pandemic this year has really highlighted the injustice of the exorbitant, exploitative, extortionate international student fee twice, sometimes thrice, as much as the 9K baseline. This government told us to leave our homes, leave our families, leave our countries to head to empire where we could benefit from a blended learning model. That was a lie. Many students at my universities have paid $14,000 plus $6,000 in rent, in addition to living costs, to sit in a small room to look at a screen. It isn't right, and that's why we need to carry on lobbying for government to take action on fees to ensure there is support for students this year, and then we need to continue the conversation to stop using international students as cash cows and to demarketize, because students deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil, dropping so many gems of wisdom there. So much support in the chat, honestly. Like, I think when you were connecting all of this to colonialism, neo-colonialism, how it's continuing to function, so important. And when we say we're fighting for free education, we mean that for everyone. This is not about home students, it's about all students. And we need to bring free education as a reality into existence. And I know that collectively we can do that. So really, really grateful for you speaking there, Neil. You spoke so brilliantly there as our penultimate speaker, and I think we're going to have no less of an amazing speech coming from our last speaker coming up, who is Rais Nobai. And I'm very, very excited to have Rais with us as our final speaker of the evening. Because Rais is a student at Wits University in South Africa, who helped start the Wits Coalition for Free Education. And so a perfect tie there between the conversation we were just having about the need for justice for international students. But of course, this is so inherently linked with our siblings across the global student movement and the realities that we're all facing in this moment, but also beyond this moment. So Rais, please do take the floor. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Apologies, thank you for the platform. Friends, comrades, fellow students, I speak to you from inside Wits University in Johannesburg, which for the past few weeks has been in a state of student revolt. We revolt because for too long, our institutions have erected a wall of debt around registration and graduation. We revolt because our government spends billions of rands bailing out fossil fuel enterprises, then pleads poverty when we demand a bailout to eliminate student debt. We revolt because even in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, fees continue to rise. Fees that were already too high for too many. To draw on Frantz Fanon, we revolt simply because for so many reasons, we can no longer breathe. So we took to the streets and undertook direct action, like we had done during the Fees Must Fall protests in 2015 and 2016, like students in India did when protesting against the fascism of Narendra Modi's BJP government, like Congolese students did in 1964, when Lovanium University was shut down and occupied by a student movement that was the most significant challenge to General Mobutu's neo-colonial dictatorial regime. A student movement that kept the spirit of Lumumba's Congo, Lumumba's decolonial independent Congo alive. Like students did during the Berkeley student movement in the US and during the 1968 student revolts in France. In response to this direct action, our university, Wits University, deployed bouncers to brutalize us and has victimized student activists, suspending us and charging us. University management has locked us out of our own campuses, forcing us out into the streets and placing us in the firing line of a trigger-happy police force. Over the past few weeks, protesting students have been met with the familiar tactics of the riot police: rubber-coated steel bullets, tear gas, stun grenades, smoke bombs, high-pressure hoses, and arrests. An innocent man was murdered in the streets surrounding this campus. Mtokozizi Ntumba had his life and his future robbed from him by a rabid, bloodthirsty police force. Let his name reverberate around the world as a reminder of the police violence that is unleashed by the state and capital against those demanding a more just world. In South Africa, the Fees Must Fall movement of 2015 was preceded by the Roads Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town, an expression of rage against a colonial order of domination and subjugation. We have not forgotten. We have not forgotten the many crimes of British Empire on the African continent and against the people of the Third World. Our call is not merely for the immediate implementation of free education, but for the broader decolonization of our institution and our systems of education, of our curricula and our pedagogy. We know that it is colonialism, neocolonialism, and apartheid which has racialized and maintained our obscene levels of inequality, shutting the doors of education to the Black working class. The crisis we see in higher education is a crisis in capitalism. It happens within a climate of austerity where corporate gains are placed above public spending. We know that this phenomenon of austerity is not only a South African one. Across the world, austerity policies wage a war on the poor and the working class. In the global South, we face a common enemy in the predatory institutions of the IMF and the World Bank. Neoliberal capitalism is a global phenomenon, a machine of exploitation that is addicted to fossil fuels and endangering the future of life through the destructive logic of greed and accumulation, the destructive logic of capitalism. In meeting it, we must dare to be revolutionary in thought and in action. In order to comprehensively address global systems of injustice, we must articulate and advance a socialist, progressive internationalism. Across the borders drawn by the bloody hands of colonialism, a specter of the revolting student is haunting the status quo. Comrades, students, our generational mission is laying itself out before us. If we unite, student and worker, the colonized and the dispossessed, those organizing in communities and the forces of climate justice, we can burn these systems of interlocking oppression to the ground. And together, we can build a better, more just world in its place. Thank you.
Wow, Rise, that was a gift of a speech. Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, I think that was the perfect way to round up in really understanding how capitalism, austerity, and colonialism are all converging to produce this education system, to produce this world that has kept so many of us oppressed, downtrodden, and exhausted by way of those forms of oppression. It links to what Graham was saying about always remembering to be radical and to be rooted, to know that we must be internationalists in our campaigning, that we must continue to recognize that all our struggles are interconnected, that they are all rooted in the same systemic issues that across the world over, are keeping students down, are stopping us from accessing the education, the liberation, and the freedom and the justice that we deserve. And only that through collectivism can we achieve those things of structural support, like what Helen was talking about, of financial support. Only through collectivism can we achieve free education that rejects colonialism and colonial systems of education, like what Neil was talking about, that make sure that everyone has access to a demarketized, democratized, decolonized education system. And these are things that students before us have fought for, as Zara and Belle spoke to two wonderful MPs who came to support us and who themselves had their roots in activism in the student movement. And I think all of this reminds us that there is so much power in the conversations that we're having throughout national conference. There's so much power in how we organize beyond this. Because we are, as I said in my opening speech the other day, we are deciding what the history books are going to say about this iteration of the student movement. And so in this moment, it's so important that we don't get caught in the weeds of injustice, that we don't end up asking for scraps, begging for scraps, because we're so exhausted, that when we say students deserve better, we're talking about better as a truly transformative vision of what education and our world can be. And so I'm so excited that so many of you came this evening. I thank you so much for joining. We're coming to the end of our speeches and of our time together. But as Joe has said in the chat, we are one family who will stand together, and the student movement family and our allies and supporters around the world really are going to stand together in solidarity. For folks saying they have chills in the chat, yes, Nikita, me too. Honestly, thank you so much, Race. That was really amazing, and I think the perfect way to round off our rally this evening. A reminder to folks to go through all of those actions, sign the Students Deserve Better petition, make sure you tell a friend to sign, also sign the Justice for BTEC Students petition, also make sure that you're engaging with those actions coming out of Queen Mary's and supporting students on rent strike who are facing unfair evictions. Please let's make sure that we're putting in our calendars, going to the socials of Ease the Fees and Write Off Right Now, who have their day of action coming up on the 16th. Please support the grassroots organisations, all of whom have been involved in this, such as Liberate the University, Pause or Pay, and the rent strike movement. Make sure you sign up for the organising school that we've got coming up with the Red Square movement, and supported by the World Transformed, so that we can really take the things that we're learning, the things that are being exposed and exacerbated by this pandemic, and make sure that into the future, we really do transform our education system. Support pandemic PGRs, send a letter to your parliamentary folks who represent you through that letter that they shared, but also please do read the report. It is so important that we have PGRs represented and their voices are heard loud and clear in the student movement. And of course, please remember that all of this is part of something so much bigger than us, so much bigger than what we're doing here, is part of the global student movement. So thank you so much for coming. Truly appreciate all the energy that folks have given to this, because I know that folks have been exhausted after a long day of a national conference, but I think it's so important that we came together to hear from some amazing speakers, to support some actions in solidarity with folks who have joined us from their various grassroots groups and students' unions. And without further ado, I guess all that's left to say is thank you and good night.